Welcome, everybody. My name is Justin, and I am an addict. I have been actively working the steps in the rooms of recovery since September of 2013 and am grateful to be sober, one day at a time, thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts. RICO 12 is an organization with the mission of learning and sharing the similarities of addiction of all kinds and gaining and sharing tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. Speakers from our past meetings have represented many fellowships and identify with addictions of such variety as alcohol, drugs, food, sex, gambling, theft, just to name a few. Each Friday at noon Central Time, we hold a live lunch hour speaker meeting with a recovering addict from anywhere on earth, pertaining to any or no faith tradition, and with any background who shares their experience, strength, and hope on a specified recovery topic of their choice. They share for 20 to 25 minutes on that topic, and then the live audience gets the opportunity to ask questions of that speaker for another 20 to 25 minutes. Before I introduce our guest speaker for today, I want to make a quick announcement about plans for RICO 12 this year in 2022. Beginning March 4th of 2022, we will start a 12-week series on each of the 12 steps of recovery. I'm searching for people who are absolutely passionate about one of the 12 steps and come from any and all fellowships of recovery and who would like to share with us their experience, strength, and hope on that step. The basic format will be the same, about 20 to 25 minutes of a share, 20 to 25 minutes of Q&A from the live audience. So if you or someone in your fellowship is passionate about one of the steps and just seems to share about a particular step and the power of that step in your life, please consider reaching out to me at rico12pod@gmail.com. And we will discuss it and get it scheduled. We have 3 steps spoken for so far, so get in quickly if you'd like to be one of those guest speakers. All right, donations and reviews are greatly appreciated, and details on doing that will be in the chat of the live meeting and in the show notes of the podcast. We look forward each week to receiving the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now, let's introduce our guest speaker for the 84th RICO 12 meeting, Eric H., whose topic is God with Skin On. Now, here's Eric's intro in his own words. He says, "Today, I celebrate my 2-year sobriety birthday. Happy birthday. I've been a sexaholic forever, and finally, 2 years ago, I was finally ready to admit to myself that my life was a mess. My addiction was taking over all aspects of my life, and I saw a vision of everything I claimed to care about slipping away. I came into SA on the heels of an emotional affair that ended in 2019. I truly thought at the time that I was going to have to suffer with this affliction for the rest of my life. SA and my higher power saved my life. The thing I craved most and never got as a child was emotional connections. I found the real connection here in the rooms of SA, and it's given me the tools to use to make those connections in all aspects of my life. Happy birthday, Eric. The floor is yours."
Well, thank you so much, Justin. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak on this special day. When I first reached out to you, I looked at the calendar and said, holy cow, I literally get to be on a podcast that I love and enjoy on my birthday if I have the opportunity, and it happened to work out. So it's a blessing to be here and be a part of recovery and be a part of this podcast and this fellowship. So I may get emotional. I wasn't feeling emotional a few minutes ago, but I may end up being emotional during this talk. And I've learned in this program that emotions are A-okay. So whatever happens, happens, and we'll leave that part up to my higher power. I will start with the problem. And I don't like to talk about the problem anymore. I've been here for 2 years, and I rather talk about solutions. We'll get to that, but the problem got me here. And in the problem, I still found, looking back on it, the reason for this topic, and that is God with skin on. So I am grateful for the road I traveled prior to this. I don't want to shut the door on it. And so I'll speak a little bit about how I ended up in this program. And like my intro said, I've been a sexaholic forever. It started out with just fantasy. I lacked emotional connections with other human beings as a child, especially with my parents. And so I found myself escaping into books, into reading, and that was my first foray into fantasy. But that quickly led to just the lust and the sexual obsession, the objectification of other human beings. And now 2 years into it, looking back on it, man, that's just been my life constantly. And what ended up getting me into the rooms of SA was an emotional affair. And 2 years ago, I would not have even been able to define my relationship as an emotional affair. I thought I was literally just being friends with a female person. I had no idea that what I was doing was an emotional affair. So I met this person. We both go to the same church, and she was looking for a companionship, looking for a friend. I was looking for the same thing. Like I said, I lacked emotional connections as a young person. So anytime I could have some kind of emotional connection, it was a godsend to me. And it started out great. We were fast friends. We started talking about deep things. And that's what I always craved as a human being, was being able to have a really deep conversation with another human being. And I just rarely got that. And so this person provided that very deep connection when we started talking about our own addictions. We're both SAs. And she's got her own stuff going on. I had my own stuff going on at the time. And, I thought, man, this is great. We can be each other's accountability partners. We can talk about things that we can't share with another human being. There were a lot of good reasons to be in that relationship. But it quickly turned. It only lasts, like affairs do. It only lasted a few months. And things started to get really wonky, started to get really weird. And in fact, my wife wrote a 3-page document prior to me coming into SA, defining the relationship. That's a term younger people than me use all the time, but she literally sat me down and she said, if you are going to continue to have this relationship with this person, here are the ground rules. And that was really a wake-up call to my life being a mess. What ended up happening, though, was this person actually told me about SA. And so in the middle of 2019, as our affair was unraveling, this person had told me, look, there's this program out there for people like you, people like me, that can provide help if you're really looking for help. Because she told me straight up, she's like, I don't think I can be your accountability partner anymore. This isn't working any longer. And I tried like heck to claw that relationship into existence. And I didn't want to let it go. But yeah, she told me about this program, and I was scared. I was scared as heck to even consider the fact that I might be an addict. But I didn't have any other outlet. And what happened at the end of my relationship with her was I realized that the fantasy and the objectification that I was just making up in my mind had now turned into something real, that emotional affair was going to lead to physical affairs with other women. And I saw this vision of myself standing at the edge of a precipice. This dark pit was in front of me. And I said to myself, if I take a step into this abyss, into this nothingness that is out there, this path that is leading me farther and farther away from my religion, farther and farther away from my family, that there's no coming back. I will be in this pit for the rest of my life. And that scared me to death. And so I started praying like crazy to my higher power. I remember distinctly praying. I said, God, please, if you are out there, I want this affliction removed by the time I am 40. And he did that for me. It's absolutely amazing. In fact, the next thing that happened was on the heels of this affair, I was praying. I was in a group setting at my church, and I was in line to go to see a priest for spiritual direction and confession. And I was praying in line that I would be given the opportunity to talk to the pastor of the church in which this woman had told me was leading or knew about an SA group. And at that time, I thought it was just a rumor. I didn't know what SA was. I didn't know how to contact anybody. I just heard that there was a priest in our local community that had meetings at his church, and I really needed to talk to this guy. And by the grace of God, I got to go into his room and talk to him about what had happened and what was going on in my life. And it's funny because at the time, I start laying all this stuff out on the table. Hey, I hear this rumor that there's these meetings. I really like to be a part of this. I think I've got a problem. And he looks at me and he says, Eric, how many times a month are we talking? Are we talking a few times a month? I said, no, I'm talking a few times a day. And he rocks back in the chair and he's like, Eric, you've got a serious problem. And I said, I know. I want out. And so that was my first realization that God actually has skin on, that in the midst of the pain and the suffering, this person that I had had an affair with was at least had a spiritual life enough that she was willing to point out that there was an exit hatch, that there was an escape hatch of which if I was willing to take the steps, I could get through that door. And the same thing with the priest that I was talking to. He immediately gave me the phone number of our local group, and I was able to reach out. So that was in December of 19, and I entered the rooms of recovery January of 2020. And it's been an absolute blessing on the back of that pain and that suffering that I find myself here celebrating 2 years of sobriety. And I didn't think that was going to be possible, quite honestly. It's absolutely amazing. So like I said, I'm a solutions guy, and so I want to spend some time now in the solution, because the first meeting I attended in January 16th, so to be rigorously honest, I was so full of pride and so full of ego that I wanted to be sober, quote unquote, when I walked through the doors of recovery. So my sobriety date is January 14th. My first meeting was January 16th, and it just happened to be the day that my local group was meeting. And so I walked through the door. We had a newcomer. It was me and somebody else. We're both newcomers that evening. And there was a gentleman there that shared his story during the newcomer meeting. And it was this vision that I had had. He was 10 years old. He is 10 years older than me. He is currently my sponsor and has been my sponsor for the last 2 years. And so I'm going to dive into sponsorship as a form of God with skin on. But in his newcomer share, he laid out his experience of being an addict, of having affairs with other women, all of this stuff. And he's 10 years older than me. And I immediately, like, this vision that I had of the abyss was made clear, because I knew that's exactly where my life was going over the next 10 years. If I continued down the path I was going, if I didn't have sobriety, I knew I was going to follow that same exact path. And so that's what led me to asking this guy to be my sponsor. And he has been for the last 2 years. And it's been an absolutely wonderful experience, because in that I've learned that in this fellowship, people have my best interest in mind. And I never had that growing up. I never had that emotional connection where I trusted other people to have my best interest in mind. But this particular person did. He wanted what was best for me. He knew the path that I was walking down, and he knows the path that I could be walking down. And he's always had my best interest in mind. I've not liked what he said sometimes. I don't like some of the things that he's told me, but I knew at the back end of that he really wanted what was best for me. And what I've learned is sometimes life can't be easy. Life's not always sunshines and rainbows and unicorns. But sometimes you got to do the hard work, and you got to not like the answer. But on the back end of that is something beautiful and something excellent. So he's also somebody that shown me, again, this idea of God with skin on. He's shown me this gentleness and this understanding and this kindness, which, when I was working the steps, I really figured out, that's who my higher power is. It's somebody who's not just loving and kind, but sometimes you have to do the hard work, and sometimes you got to do whatever it is that my higher power is asking of me. And there's a gentleness and an understanding in that, but you got to fess up to the reality that sometimes life is gentle or difficult. Sometimes life is difficult, and he's willing to call me out on that. And that's really great. This idea of accountability and just calling each other out, working towards a common goal of sobriety. And when we see each other slipping or doing something that may not help our sobriety, that we get to call each other out, and we do that in love and understanding. And that's been a beautiful part of the sponsorship journey. So I'm just incredibly grateful for not only my sponsor, but there's been a lot of people on this road that I've traveled in sobriety that have helped me along the path. There's people that have spoken on this podcast previously that I've been able to reach out to, especially when I was working the steps the first time. I got stuck in, steps 4 and 5, let's say, and I was able to reach out to other people that had experience with that. Hey, how did you work this step? What did you provide your sponsors? I'm having trouble with that. People that I can reach out to on a regular basis. And that's really the third pillar of where I found God with skin on, is in this fellowship of other addicts. And it's just been this beautiful awakening. I grew up in church. I have gone to church my entire life. But there was a part of me that was spiritually dead. And I didn't even recognize that until I got into the rooms of recovery. I could talk the talk about my particular faith tradition. I could look the part that I was a good, faithful member of my community, but inside I was spiritually dead. And I didn't even recognize that until I got into the rooms of recovery. And it's in these rooms that, where we don't talk about religion, that I had this spiritual awakening. And it's been this just amazing, amazing experience to be able to, like I said, connect with other human beings on a spiritual level that I never thought was possible. I have had some of the most amazing conversations with other human beings in these rooms of recovery, and it can be about any topic. But it's also led me to realize that's how I have real connections with people outside the rooms, is by using the tools of recovery, using steps 11 and 12 to really listen to and recognize that other human beings are people just like me. And we've got our flaws, we've got our strengths, and there's this mirror effect that I like to call it, that each human being is a reflection of their higher power. And if I'm truly present in that moment, then I see my higher power at work through them, and they're reflecting something that my higher power wants me to either share or receive through that interaction. So again, it's quite literally, this spiritual program has shown me that God does really have skin on, that he wants me to listen. There's that line, he gives us 2 ears and 1 mouth. I didn't know what that meant, but I really understand it a lot better now, that I can shut my own mouth and listen, because there's something there that either God is speaking to me or wants me to reflect back in terms of service to another human being. It's also helped me, just in terms of, like I said, spiritual connections. I didn't know how to have real relationships with other people because I was so caught up in the fantasy. I never said this out loud before, but it came to light the other day that because I lacked emotional support and emotional connection at home, my original or my initial concept of relationships was built around relationships that I saw on television. And I recognize now that television's a form of fantasy, that they aren't real relationships. But that was the only concept of love and relationship that I understood. And at the time, I'm a child of the 90s, and I remember these TV shows that I used to watch, right? That the concept of love was just to love bomb on everybody. And that's not reality. But I didn't know any better at the time. And so now I have this opportunity to recognize what a real relationship is. And when a conversation's done, like I can pump the brakes and say, all right, it's time to move on to the next thing. I recognize now, when what it is that God actually needs me to do. And if it's make a phone call to a brother, answer the phone, I do that first. If it's, whatever it is, before I came on this podcast, I had several things lined out that I had to get done. And, my normal day would be to, just wait around and focus on this and obsess about this. And no, I don't get to do that anymore. Like, there were a certain number of things that I needed to get done before I jumped on here today. And I was given that opportunity. So, it's just, I can't fathom the growth that's made. I was sharing with somebody else earlier that I look back on the last 2 years and it's amazing to me. I can't fathom. It feels like yesterday that I was coming into the rooms, and it feels like a lifetime ago. And I had the same experience when my children were born, that all of a sudden there was this huge shift in my life. And my wife and I joke about it all the time. She says, "What did we do before we have kids?" And I said, "I don't know, but I think that's our higher power at work." Like, he literally just erased all of that stuff from our brain so that we could focus on our children. And I've only got a few minutes left, and I would like to speak a little bit about family in terms of God with skin on. One of the things I experienced going back to the beginning is my oldest daughter was born in 2014. So I came into the rooms in 2020. She was 5 years old. And I saw this look on her face, this look of detachment, because I was so full of resentment. I was so full of ego. I was so full of myself, and I saw my daughter detaching from me, this look of just blank stare, and she didn't want to be around me. She didn't know how to say it, but she didn't want to be around me. And I look back on that and I say, man, I wouldn't want to be around me either. Like, why? I was a terrible human being, or I acted in a terrible way. I recognize that I'm not a terrible human being. I'm a sick person trying to be well. And, my family has been one of those places where I have seen, again, this God with skin on, being in recovery with my children. They now call me out on my stuff. If I'm being a jerk, they're quick to point out, "Hey, you're doing something that I don't like." And it's been awesome to have that experience, right? That they are their own little human beings, that they have a higher power of their own understanding. And I get to let that go, and they get to experience life on their terms. I don't need to control and manage and fix any of that stuff. But when I start to, they recognize that. My oldest daughter today is like, "I don't get to choose how my little siblings act. I get to choose how I act." I said, "Amen, sister." So it's been cool. They're actually on the other side of the wall right now as I'm speaking. They're doing their homework and playing together, and they're just doing their own little thing, because that's how now I get to see them grow up that way. And it's been great to be a part of that. So, man, there's just all these things where, yeah, God is doing wonderful things in my life, and I see that now through my interactions with other human beings. So I think I've come to the end of my talk, and Justin, I really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. I really appreciate that, Sharon. I love how you incorporated God with skin on into so many different facets of your life, even down to your kids, your young children. Out of the mouths of babes, some of the wisest things are spoken, and I'm grateful for those realizations in my own life too. In my own fellowship, when somebody reaches a milestone, like an anniversary, a birthday, we often ask them, a question, something like this: how did you get to 2 years? And what I want to do is kind of ask you this, Eric. What have you tried? What have you done that is different from everything else you tried your whole life, knowing that you've been struggling with this your whole life? I know for myself, my whole life, I was like, just take this from me, God. I don't want it anymore. Take it from me. And I tried everything I thought I knew how to do. What have you done differently to stay sober for the last 2 years, one day at a time?
Yeah, for sure. So something I didn't talk about, but I talk about often is, prior to working the steps, I had this conception of God that was like Amazon Prime, or like Wile E. Coyote. If you guys, anybody listening remembers the Looney Tunes, right? Wile E. Coyote was always trying to chase down Roadrunner, and he'd order the set of rocket skates or the cannon or whatever it was, right? And Acme Delivery would literally show up 30 seconds later. I had no concept of God's timing. It was all about me. I wanted things done. So if I prayed something, and I grew up with this misconception in my church that if I prayed, God would do something. But in my mind, it was God is going to do something on my terms and in my time. And what I've learned through working the steps 1, 2, and 3, baby, you got to, like I'm talking about anybody else. I have learned to surrender. Surrender, surrender, surrender. Step 1, absolutely surrender. When I was finally able to recognize what surrender looked like, my world changed. And when I was able to fully surrender and recognize that God would do something for me that I was incapable of doing on my own, the world shifted for me. Because then the concepts that come around in steps 2 and 3 about firing the God of my understanding and then picking up the God that is actually out there for me came to life. Now, the other steps are incredibly difficult, but it was really working that step of surrender. And one of the things that I do now is, I didn't talk about it during my share. However, just last week, I didn't think I was going to make it to 2 years, because last week I was stuck in this fantasy world that I could not get out of. And I was not living one day at a time. I was living 1 hour and 1 moment at a time. And what the steps has taught me is, what do you do in those moments? I could go act out for sure. That's an option. But what I've learned is you surrender that to another human being in the fellowship. And when I ran out of human beings in the fellowship to talk to, I started calling other people in my family that I've talked to and just started having conversations with them. You know, you said, how do I put this into practice in all aspects of my life? I just started calling people, and that act of surrender finally gave me enough distance between the obsession and my own stinking thinking that I could then fully surrender and let it go. So yeah, and now I'm here. It's 2 years. So one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, surrender it out and give it to God, because he does it. Like you said, it's how do I do it? I can't. I literally can't. And I was presented an option there with the veil between my spiritual life and my spiritual death. I was reminded a week ago how thin that veil actually is and how quickly I can die that spiritual death if I go back out there. So I'll pass back to you, Justin. Thanks.
Awesome. And you mentioned that until you realized what surrender looks like to you. And I know this is a semi-unique thing to everybody. And you did mention, hey, I make a call. That's kind of a surrender thing. Is that what surrender looks like to you? Is that what it initially looked like? How does it evolve? How has that process evolved to you? Because surrender to me was such a foreign concept when I first came into the rooms. In fact, it took years of being in the rooms before I went, oh, I get it. So what does that look like specifically to you?
Yeah. I tell people in the big book, it says that the promises of the big book, right? That these things happen sometimes quickly and sometimes slowly. And for me, this particular thing about surrender happened quickly. And for that, I am extremely grateful. I knew I had no other option when I first came into the room. I knew if I continued down the path I was going, I was spiritually and probably going to be physically dead. My wife and I are both very strong personalities, and she jokingly, she found this old Victorian story about where a wife got very resentful at her husband and apparently sewed him into the bed sheets and then beat him with a broomstick. And I knew my wife was capable and willing and going to do that. So yes, was there an external motivator? Absolutely. But I knew there was no other option. And so I very quickly surrendered to my sponsor and did whatever he told me I was supposed to do. If it was make a phone call, I made a phone call. If it was read something from literature, I read something from literature, because I was a terrible coach of myself. I needed somebody better than I was to help me through that process. And it happened quickly for me. I had this experience only about 3 months into recovery in which I actually felt God give me a hug. And I had never felt that before. And when that happened, I was like, oh my goodness, this is what this is. This is what surrender is. If I can just lay back into that hug, he's got me and I don't need to worry about a darn thing. And the world can be blowing up around me, but he's got my back and he knows what's up. So yeah, I'm grateful that it happened quickly. I know that's not the case for everybody. I'll pass. Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you for reminding me of my own experience of God give me a hug. I just refelt that now. So I'm going to try not to get emotional, but thank you for sharing that. We have a question that came in from our live audience, and a reminder to our live audience: if you wish to ask a question of Eric, please type it in the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom window. It looks like two speech bubbles over the top of each other. This comes in from someone who is an anonymous attendee, and they said, "Wonderful share. Thank you. You mentioned reading. Was that like fiction escapism type things? And how do you remain sober with that?"
Yeah. So yes, my original escape was with fiction, and I remember I was an avid reader. I loved going to the library. I loved checking out books. When I was a young person, I would check out like the Hardy Boys books, and I'd literally, or Choose Your Own Adventure. Like I said, I'm a child of the 90s, so those were super popular. I'd literally read them cover to cover. And, at the time, it's like, what parent doesn't want their kid to read a book, right? That it was just something that, but I recognize now that it was my first foray into escape, that I could think about a different world outside my own, that I could go someplace other than the present moment. And looking back on that, that's really how I live my life. I never lived life in the present moment. I always was living somewhere else, obsessing about the past, obsessing about the future, obsessing about some alternate reality that just wasn't the present moment. And looking back, I was like, wow, that's a really dangerous path to travel. But I'm grateful that I can, share that experience with my own children. I kind of recognize that now in my own children, and I can share that, hey, this is what happened in my own life. I can't control you. You're going to choose your own path, but here's my experience in that. So like I said, I don't want to shut the door on the past, but grateful for it, and I can share that experience with those that need to hear it. Thanks for the question.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Eric. You mentioned what kind of brought you into the rooms of SA was an emotional affair, and you went into some detail about what happened there and everything like that. I remember in my own experience, that is something that also brought me into the rooms of recovery, was an emotional affair. And a couple of years ago, my wife and I were out to dinner with another couple who are also in the rooms of recovery. And we were talking about our own experiences. And my wife said something to them. She said something to them that really shook me to the core. She said, and then he went and had an affair. And I never had a quote unquote physical affair, but to her, it was the exact same thing. An emotional affair and a physical affair were the same thing. So tell me a little bit about your experience, and not to share your wife's experience, but is there a difference in her eyes between an emotional affair and a physical affair?
Yeah. And actually, in her words, there is nothing different than my previous acting out, which was all fantasy based. And I don't need to get into that, but we can all, I think we can all relate to fantasy based stuff, and an emotional affair and a physical affair. They're all the same in her mind. What I was lacking was an understanding of what that actually meant. And, it's when I did my 9th step with her, I said, I don't think this is the only 9th step I will do in our relationship. If God asks us to continue to be married and in a relationship, because I know I've done a ton of damage, and it's going to be a while before that fully heals itself. And there may be other wounds that come up that I need to make amends for that I'm just not aware of in this moment. And that's happened. This idea of God with skin on, he's revealed. So my wife now feels safe enough around me to reveal another thing. Hey, this thing in the past, what was that? What did that look like? I think, it hurt me some way. And so it's really given me this opportunity, because now we're in this kind of safe space. But I can totally relate to, conversations. Like I said, if sitting around, with, she's one of 5, one of 5 girls in her family. So we see her sisters all the time. Right. And so part of my part of my addictive behavior has impacted each one of them and her relationship with each one of them. So like you said, we'll be sitting around as a family and somebody will pop something off. And one, I'm grateful that people feel safe enough around me to say that out loud. And I express that. I was like, man, I'm so grateful that you feel safe enough to say that. Cause yeah, I was a jerk. I was a terrible person to be around. But it also like opens that door, right, to make a living amends or to make an actual amends to the person that I've harmed. And so that's been a really great experience for me.
Thank you for sharing that. Another question I have for you that kind of goes along with my own experience. So I'm going to ask this because it was a powerful experience for me. You mentioned that you grew up and maintained a very faithful relationship with your religion throughout your life. On the outside, you looked like the perfect, member of your faith. And then as you entered the rooms of recovery, you gained a new understanding of God, your higher power, and how that works in your life. What is the difference to you now between God and church or God and religion? And how does that work now in your life?
Yeah. It's pretty amazing, actually. Somebody posted a while back something that I really have been relying on the last couple of months. And it was a slogan that said something along the lines, as soon as we stop doing God's will, we start doing his job. And I recognize now in the rooms of recovery how often I was trying to do God's job because I didn't trust anybody in the world. Sometimes I didn't even trust myself. And so if I didn't trust my higher power, then I was constantly trying to do his job because I didn't think he could be doing a good enough job in that. What I've recognized now is, this program has not, it hasn't deflated my religious experience. It's actually expanded my religious experience because I recognize now what my religion has been trying to teach me about spiritual things my entire life. And for this program, I'm internally grateful, right? That by talking to people with other religious experiences, by talking to people with no religious experience, I've had this spiritual experience that my own faith community has been trying to teach me about my entire life. And by that, I can now say, all right, God, what is your will for me? Not his job, but what his will is. And what his will is to simply love and be merciful and gracious towards other human beings because we are all human. And I don't have to have a perfect world around me for me to live my life. I can allow other people to do what they want to do, what they need to do, etc., without me trying to control, fix, manage, do all of the playing God, like to say in the rooms of recovery. I was just doing that way too much. And I was spiritually dead because I was constantly trying to do God's job instead of leaving his job up to him and letting him tell me what to do. So I hope that answers the question.
Awesome. I have a very similar quote to that just posted right behind my computer. I'm pointing at it right now. Am I trying to do God's job or am I going about trying to be at God's work?
Yep.
And what a blessing that is to realize that I am not God. And if I try to be God, I am a terrible God. And I'm just going to screw things up for me and for everybody else around me if I'm trying to do his job.
Yep.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. All right. Reminder to our live audience, if you do have questions, type them in the Q&A link there at the bottom of the window. We'll get to those. I have a couple more questions here that I've written, but love to hear more from our live audience. So you came into the rooms of recovery right about the time that COVID started threatening and eventually within a couple of months disrupting our entire lives. Mm-hmm. I know lots of people who were very early in recovery when that happened that just went off the rails because their support system changed. It came out from underneath them. How did you navigate that successfully with that massive change in your life, in everybody's life?
That's a loaded question, Justin. How did I do it? I didn't do it. Not at all. It was not me 100%. In fact, I I had a very, so it's kind of crazy thinking back about this. Yeah, when my first meeting was in person, and the first few months of recovery were in person. And like you said, then the world changed around me. But what I found was the online meetings. People switched to the Zoom meetings very quickly. Our own local group switched to the Zoom meetings very, very quickly. And nothing in terms of my recovery really changed, except I didn't really see anybody face to face for a full year. Thankfully, our home group is back to doing a hybrid setup where we do meet. Those that are able can meet face to face, but we also offer a hybrid setup. So people are coming into our local meetings, but from all over the place. And it's been an absolute beauty of recovery, because I think for me, at least, what I recognized was that there are literally people all over the world. Especially when you attend, like for me, the noon SA phone meeting was a huge boost to my recovery, because I could call into that and there's people from all over the world attending that. And it's like, oh, it's not me. It's all of these other people that have similar experiences. And that was an awesome experience for me. The other thing that it did was, at least for me, is it helped folks like me that had not broken through that external barrier, let's say, that were also spiritually dead. I have met so many people in my own faith community that through this COVID experience have taken the time for themselves to heal. And whether they're working a recovery program or a recovery style program, I don't flip and care what they're doing, but they're working some kind of program for themselves that's not just a theological, not just a church program, but actually a spiritual program. And I've met so many people like that through my own just church experience and being out in the community. It is unreal to me how many people are working a program now. And it's just been beautiful for my own recovery. And it's been beautiful to have, like I said, that real meaningful connection with people. So yeah, that's where I stand. It's COVID was to me a real boost to my recovery, let's say.
Amen. It was for me too. And I'm grateful for those who really took the ball and ran with it when new opportunities came up that initially looked like just disastrous things for the recovery community, for the addiction community. And really, it has been disastrous for a lot of people who don't know where to turn. But right. Grateful that we know where we can turn as long as I have the courage to rely on God and make that step to become uncomfortable and meet new people in new ways.
Yeah.
All right. Next question comes in from Deborah from our live audience. Deborah asks, how does sponsorship look for you once you got to step 12? You said accountability, but what's your relationship with your sponsor now? Many sponsors don't keep us once we start sponsoring.
That's not been my experience, and so I can't speak for everybody else. However, what I've learned in my own program is, at least in my experience, my sponsor has not dropped me. However, the initial like weekly or bi-weekly kind of step work has gone away. But there are things that my sponsor knows that nobody else in the program knows. It's the one person that I can turn to on a regular basis, and he knows the full story, let's say. And that's been really, really beautiful for me to be able to turn back to my sponsor and say, hey, I'm really having a hard time over here. In fact, I mentioned, something happened last week that really had my own obsessive mind going round and round. He's the only person that knows the full story about, what that obsession looks like. And so I can turn to him and say, do I need to work a step over here? Or am I stuck in my character defects? Where am I getting hung up? Because he knows the full story. And for that, I'm really, really grateful. We're all on the path together, and, he's still carrying the torch. He's been in the program longer than I have. And, so I can rely on him to provide, if it's dark for me, he can shine the torch and show me where to take the next step. So I'm really, really grateful for that.
Thank you. And I assume you're sponsoring right now. What does that look like to you right now as you sponsor? Are you doing it the same way your sponsor did with you, or how does that look for you?
Yeah, in fact, it's kind of interesting. You asked me a question earlier about, sometimes things happen quickly, sometimes things happen slowly. A few people asked me to be a sponsor, and those people haven't necessarily followed my suggestions or stuck around, right? So I'm open to sponsorship, but can I honestly say that I'm sponsoring anybody right now? I'm really not. My sponsor reminds me, is like, Eric, I think maybe in this particular instance, you were kind of a special case. You really wanted out of the previous lifestyle and you were willing to go to any lengths to get it. But what it's also taught me is, some of the questions you always learn in the experience, right? Like I could be in my own self-pity, I could be resentful of, well, I don't have any sponsors, these guys aren't taking my advice, blah, it's not about me. It's helped me to learn, okay, is their experience similar enough to mine that I'd actually be a good fit, right? It's taught me how to ask some different questions, because as a newbie, it's like, oh, somebody wants me to be their sponsor. Heck yes, I'll be your sponsor, no problem. Is it a good fit? You don't know how to ask those questions necessarily, or figure that out. So really, that experience has taught me, okay, I need to ask this question, that question. Somebody came into the rooms the other day, and in our local group, I really take this seriously. In our local group, we ask the question, if you're looking for a sponsor, we say, look around the room and find somebody's story that you connect with and ask them. And in my experience, if it goes the other way, if somebody just reaches out and says, hey, I'm looking for a sponsor, is anybody available to sponsor? I don't know if that works the right way, right? That there's got to be that connection with another human being, and that initial reaching out, hey, your story and mine connect, and will you sponsor me? So yeah, I think that hopefully answers the question.
Yeah, I love that. And my sponsor right now, he'll say this when somebody says, how do I find a sponsor? And I echo with this. He goes, attend a ton of meetings, find somebody who has light, just lasers coming out of their eyes. They have exactly what you want.
Yep.
And you identify with them and reach out to them and say, can you sponsor me?
Yep.
But sometimes I've got to go to a lot of meetings. Sometimes I've got to spend some time until I find that the flashlight's coming out of the guy's eyes or whatever.
Right.
Awesome. All right. I have another question here. And you've touched on this a few times, but I'd like to go a little bit deeper with this. What did and does that hard work of step work look like to you? I know you talked a little bit about what it looked like as you're actively first time through working the steps. What does that look like to you now?
Yeah. So I really, really like steps 10, 11, and 12, right? That we maintain the other steps. My sponsor reminds me all the time, is like, you didn't do the steps once and then you throw the toolbox away. The tools are with you. And somebody reached out to me the other day and wants to be a spiritual renewal partner and accountability partner. And one of the things that particular person wants to do is all the questions of step 10. And it's not something that I normally practice, but this particular person wants to do that. And it's actually been really good, because it reminds me of some of my blind spots and the way he does his step 10. We live in different countries, and so he'll send it to me as a text message every day. And so by reading through that, it's like, oh yeah, I recognize things in my own life where were some blind spots, and so I get to respond to that. But it's also a reminder. It's like, this, like I said, the previous week where I was in this very low spot, it's a reminder, okay, I need to work step 1 really, really well. I need to surrender this out. If I was in charge, I'd be a dead man. And it also forced me to ask the question of, is my higher power doing for me what I couldn't do by myself? Constantly, not live in my will, but live in my higher power's will. And then, ask the questions. Am I resentful? Do I need to share something with another human being that I'm afraid of sharing, right? Steps 4 and 5. Do I need to make an actual amends to somebody? I had to make an amends to my mother-in-law the other day. There was a miscommunication yesterday. In fact, I made an amends to my mother-in-law in a parking lot. She dropped my daughter off to dance class. I got home real late, so she was taking care of the kids, and she dropped my middle daughter off to dance class. And the previous day, There was a miscommunication. I was not where I said I was going to be on time. I did not pick my kids up on time. I assumed my wife was going to take care of all of the communication stuff, and she didn't. So what was my part in that? I assumed, and I had an expectation. And for that, I needed to make an amends to my mother-in-law. And so I did that in the parking lot of the dance studio. And, not just say I'm sorry. I've learned through my own experience that saying sorry can just be a placation. And so I've been teaching my kids this too. It's not just about saying sorry. What do I need to do to make this right? And my kids, it's awesome. I'm going to tear up because it's awesome when my kids say, Dad, I'm sorry I screwed up. What do I need to do to make this right? And I did that with my mother-in-law. And my wife was standing there too. And she's like, you either buy her C's candy or give her some flowers. And my mother-in-law is like, well, you don't really need to do anything. But I could see on her face, she really wanted some C's candy or some flowers. So I'm going to do it, right? Because that's what she really wants. And so I love that, step 9, just like make amends, man. It's so awesome to just get that out of there and to make it right with other human beings. And it just frees up so much of my heart and my headspace to be of service to others. I'll pass. Thanks.
All right. I've got 2 final questions for you, and I'm just going to ask them both. So when you answer, just transition from one to the other. First is, how do you and how will you move forward so that you do not get complacent and comfortable with 2 years of sobriety? And the second one is, any final words of wisdom for those of us listening?
It's funny you asked that question, Justin, because I was literally just before we started this podcast, I was asking myself, how do I not get complacent? It's so easy to, like some people like to say, it's like, you can't stay clean on yesterday's shower, right? That how do you not stay complacent? You keep relying, at least for me, I need to keep relying on my higher power. That 2 years of sobriety literally doesn't mean anything. That today is a new day. There will be new challenges. And 2 years of sobriety just doesn't mean anything. It's just a brand new day. It's the present moment. It's living in the here and now. And, what are some words of wisdom? The beautiful thing that this program, this spiritual program, has taught me is how to live in the present moment. I lived so much of my life obsessing about the past or tripping over the future. And what I get to do now is live in the present moment. And even when things aren't going right to my liking, whatever it is, God's got a reason for it. And if I can surrender that out and be in the present moment and recognize that things are exactly how they're supposed to be, then life's okay. Not great, might be painful, but it's exactly how it's supposed to be. And that's been the biggest thing in my recovery, is just being able to live in the here and now, day by day, moment by moment. I'll pass. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Eric. This was a great RICO 12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. If you have any questions that we weren't able to get to, please go to rico12.com/forum and join in our community and ask those questions and answer others' questions that may come up there. I invite the audience to come back next week. If you've not yet rated and reviewed the podcast in Apple Podcasts, please go do so now. It's a great way for us to work our step 12 and sharing this message with others. Next week, we will be hearing from Dara L., whose topic will be 2 step 1s before 1 step 2. And I'm really looking forward to it. It should be a real good one. Now let's launch off into the rest of our day with the prayer of the present moment, led by Eric.
Thanks, Justin. And, before I say the prayer, I just want to give a shout out to, there's a young SA group. And as an older person, seeing a younger generation working a program of recovery, it brightens my day and it brightens my heart. And I love seeing the recovery that young people bring to the program, that they've recognized something wrong. So this prayer is actually written by a young person, and it's from a book that was given to my children at Christmas. And when I opened it, it really touched my heart. So the prayer of the present moment. When I look into the future, I'm frightened. But why plunge into the future? Only the present moment is precious to me, as the future may never enter my soul at all. It is no longer in my power to change, correct, or add to the past, for neither sages nor prophets could do that. And so what the past has embraced, I must entrust to God. O present moment, you belong to me, whole and entire. I desire to use you as best I can. And although I am weak and small, you grant me the grace of your omnipotence. And so, trusting in your mercy, I walk through life like a little child, offering you each day this heart, burning with love for your greater glory. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. And happy birthday, Eric.
Thank you.
Keep coming back, everybody. It works when I work it. So work it. You are worth it.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching for glimmers of